And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a special hello goes out to the Director of Media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Mark Mann. I see you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the home of behind-the-scenes interviews, stories, and memories that celebrate the heritage of the great game of hockey. The Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast is hosted by Mark Willand.
Left side shot comes across the line. He's tied up, pulled down, no call. Sent side of the net. Gardner comes out, backhander stick!
Well, Paul Gardner left alone momentarily, and that's all he needs around the net because he's got a great scoring touch. Took that pass.
Episode 25 of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast features Paul Gardner, a consistent 30-goal scorer with the Pittsburgh Penguins, Toronto Maple Leafs, and Colorado Rockies in the 1970s and 80s. Paul comes from a legendary hockey family, which includes his father Cal, an all-star centerman with the Bruins, Leafs, Blackhawks, and Rangers, and his brother Dave, a first-round NHL pick and longtime NHL pro. With the Penguins, Paul twice led the NHL in power play goals. Blessed with a great touch around the net, his career average of 36 goals scored per 80 games ranks 55th among all NHL players, past and present. Unfortunately, Paul's NHL career was short-circuited by a pair of severe injuries, including a broken jaw, result of an infamous blindside attack by Winnipeg's Jimmy Mann that cost him 22 games, and a potential 50-goal season in 81-82. Paul tore through the AHL at an incredible rate in the mid-80s and eventually launched a long and successful coaching career, which included a 5-year stint with Bryan Trottier and the Nashville Predators. Paul is a terrific guy and an excellent interview, and you'll enjoy his take on his interesting career and the many characters he crossed paths with as a pro. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes. Now, let's talk classic hockey with Paul Gardner. Well, we're back on the show with one of hockey's most productive players of the 70s and 80s, Paul Gardner. Paul, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, great. Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Paul, you grew up in hockey royalty. Your father, Cal Gardner, great player, all-star with the Maple Leafs, I believe. I know the Boston Bruins. That his playing career was prior to, I think, your birth, as a matter of fact. As you were growing up, you were aware of how famous your dad was.
Yeah, I guess I was. Obviously, as a small tot, you don't realize it. But once we started, school and then going out places, and I got to, I guess, the age of 7 and 8. Everywhere you went in Toronto, where we grew up, they wanted Dad's autograph, and we would play my hockey. You'd go to the rink, and lots of people would always want to talk to him and everything. So you started to realize that a little bit. And then when I got up a little older and into my teens, people would sit and talk to me about my dad's career, and you'd see things around the house and everything. So I became very aware of it, and I was certainly very proud of what my dad accomplished: 12 seasons and 2 Stanley Cups. So I was very, very proud of Dad.
Did he, I don't want to say push you to play hockey, but he seemed, in the interviews I see, he seems like a pretty low-key type of guy. It was something, I had the feeling that hockey for yourself and your brother was something that was just enjoyable, and there wasn't a lot of pressure.
Yeah, you're exactly right. There wasn't pressure to play. It was whatever we wanted to do. If you didn't want to play, they certainly weren't going to sign you up. But we had my brother and I growing up, we played golf and we played baseball, and obviously we played hockey in the winter time, and we had a rink in the backyard, which I think is where we certainly learned a lot of our skills and everything. But there was never any pressure. Dad would come to the games and generally sit often by himself up in the corner and watch the game and say a few things after and everything, but it was never pushed upon to play. Actually, probably a couple of times in my career, he held me back from moving to higher levels. He just wanted me to play with the kids that were my age and, not get pushed up into, say, junior A or anything like that too quickly. So I think in the long run, it worked out great for us. And to be truthful, I had a more love for baseball up until probably about 16 or 17 years old, and then it all changed. So, yeah.
Either way, that Gardner hand-eye coordination would help you in any sport. It was obvious. And speaking of that, your brother goes on to become one of the great OHA players of all time, centers a historically productive line with Billy Harris and Steve Shutt, the Toronto Marlboros. It had to be, I guess what my question is, as you're watching him as a youngster, it has to be very influential going to Maple Leaf Gardens, watching him play, big crowds to see those teams. And I'm sure it made quite an impression on you.
It really did. It was great. I looked forward to, again, going to Maple Leaf Gardens and sitting with Mom and Dad and watching David play and have his success. And I think a big part of that, knowing who Dad was and then seeing David's success, a lot of my friends at that age, when I was 15 or 16, kept saying, well, you're never going to be as good as your dad. You're never going to be as good as your brother. And quietly, it sort of hit home, and I sort of, to myself, said, yes, I am. I'm going to be just as good, or certainly try to be. And that was my driving force, I think, to a lot of people, to prove a lot of people wrong, I guess, because I wasn't as good a skater as David and Dad, and so there was a lot of knocks on my game, I think. But again, I was very, very proud of David, and it was certainly special to see him get drafted to Montreal and play in the NHL, and it was an even bigger treat to play against him a few times.
I can imagine. But for yourself, now you go into your second and final season in the OHA with Oshawa, and then you start to really develop with 144 points in 75-76 and become a number one NHL draft pick of the Kansas City Scouts. What was your reaction? I think they were still the Scouts then. And
yes, they were. Yeah.
What was your reaction upon being drafted by Kansas City? Scouts, obviously a team that was at that time just 2 years old. And just curious what your thought process was when your name was called by the Scouts.
Well, it was, I guess it was sort of mixed reactions. I think as a family, we were very happy to be picked in the first round and to go to Kansas City, because there was an opportunity to play a little quicker than when David got drafted in the first round. He got picked by Montreal, and there wasn't as many openings or spots, if any, on that team. So
right.
I think when we looked at it that way, it was a chance maybe to play in the big leagues right away, and so I was very excited about it. The problem at that time, I was drafted by them, the Kansas City, and by the Birmingham Bulls in the WHA, and both teams were on the verge of moving or folding. So there was some uncertainty to it all. But when they moved to Colorado and became the Rockies, everything settled down quite a bit. But I was very, very, very proud of being picked in the first round, and certainly wanted to show Colorado that they didn't make a mistake. But it certainly wasn't the big deal that it is these days. I was caddying for my brother in a golf tournament in Las Vegas when I got the news.
That's funny. It's interesting you mentioned that too. I had forgotten that the Toronto Toros, it would have seemed natural for you if the Toros had stayed in Toronto to perhaps take a look at them. However, of course, as you noted, they were in the process of moving to Birmingham. So for yourself, now the Scouts become the Colorado Rockies, and I was curious about that first training camp. You're in your first NHL camp, and what are your impressions, and what's it like for a young guy going into the NHL training camp for the first time?
Well, it was a great experience. You thought you were in shape as a youngster, but going to Denver in the thin air and training with men rather than training with boys. It was a difficult experience, but it was great. I mean, I certainly remember quite a bit of it. The player who looked after me, and people may find it unusual, was Steve Durbano. Steve was a extremely tough hockey player who played for the Marlies with my brother. And when I got drafted to Colorado, and we were going to be at training camp together, Steve called my brother David and said that he'd look out for me and make sure that everything was okay. So Steve was my ride quite a bit to training camp, but it was difficult in the thin air, and but it was, again, a great experience, and found myself sent to the minors right off the bat with the explanation that they had a lot of veteran players that they wanted to move, and that Mike Kitchen and I should start our season in Providence in the minors.
Right. Well, it's so interesting. You mentioned Steve Durbano, who should probably make a movie about his life, and I can't imagine. So I forgot the connection with the Toronto Marlboros and your brother, but that had to be an interesting, of all people to look after you. I guess that's a good thing. No one's going to mess with you, but it had to be one of the most interesting characters you've ever run across in your career.
Yeah, certainly. Steve was he was a great teammate, but he was a little scary at times in practice, or definitely in the games. You were glad he was on your side. Had a little bit of a wild side off the ice also. So, but he could make for some long stories if you wanted to sit down. But for me, he was very good. He looked out for me, even though we were only 4 years difference. He just made sure I was okay all the time. And again, as we say, a great guy to have on your side. But later on, he had a few troubles, and yeah.
But you go down to Rhode Island, play for the Reds. And so at that point of your career, I'm following you in the hockey news, and you're looking at the stats, and you're tearing it apart there. And you get the call to the NHL, and you're very productive right off the bat. And it's kind of a lot of the way your career went. If you look at your stats per 80 games in your career, I think you averaged about 36 goals per 80 games. And in that first year with the Rockies, in just 60 games, you score 30. Do you remember your first NHL game and your first NHL goal?
Yeah, I certainly do. I don't think there's a player that forgets that. We played Friday night in Providence with the Providence Reds, and I got told that I was going to Montreal to play in the Forum for the Rockies. So it was a great thrill. Mike Kitchen and I both got called up together, and so I called my parents, and Dad and Mom were thrilled, and Dad said, just have a couple beers, relax, get some sleep, and good luck. And so we got to Montreal and got to play, and as a team we tied 3-3, but I was able to score in the second period against Kenny Dryden and Sean Shanahan and Wilf Paymont assisting on it, and so it was a big thrill for me that I'll never forget, and quite interesting. Both my brother and I scored in our first NHL games, both in the second period and both in the Montreal Forum. But David, his was for the Montreal Canadiens, and mine was against the Canadiens, yes.
But either way, not a better place to score your first goal than the fabled Forum in Montreal. And Paul, so it's a strong season for you, obviously, and you come back the next year. The Rockies had Barry Beck in the draft that year, and the team, I believe it was 78, you guys made the playoffs that year. Now, I was talking to Freddie Ahern about that recently, and he was talking about how much of a fun experience that was, and you guys gave the Flyers a pretty good battle in that first round, but it was a big step for the franchise. I guess my first question would be the impact that Barry Beck had as a kid, 19 years old. What type of a rookie was he, and what are your memories of him back then? Well,
it was a sensational player and a great guy. My first impression was I walked into his room in training camp. We were all checking in, and he was lying stark naked on the bed, enjoying some TV, and I was talking with his roommate. So there's was my first impression. But Barry was a great teammate. Just added toughness to our team. It just made us all bigger and stronger. And we went into Philadelphia where they were the Broad Street Bullies, and he won a couple of fights, and because everybody was after him. But yeah, he was a great addition to our team, and I've actually kept in touch with Barry, and was a good friend. But I'm glad he got to New York and to sort of show his talents there. But yeah, again, we were certainly a much more competitive team, and teams worried about us a little bit more, even though we were only a second-year team. And as you said, we were able to make it to the playoffs and give Philadelphia a little bit of a go in the first round.
Paul, that year, in just 46 games, you once again hit that magic 30 mark. And so you projected out over a season. Obviously, it's a 50-goal pace. But I don't remember what happened to you that year. I'm assuming you were injured?
Yes, I broke a vertebrae in my lower back. I got cross-checked into the end boards by Bob Daly against Philadelphia one night at home, and ended up breaking a vertebrae in my lower back, and was put in what they called a body cast for 6 months. I wore this brace type of cast where I could only take it off to shower and then put it back on. But so at that time, I was talked to by a few doctors, and a retirement was mentioned. But I said, well, let's see how it heals. And it was very fortunate that it fused on its own, and they gave me the okay to go back and play. The only problems I had with it, that I gained a lot of weight because I wasn't able to exercise. So the start of next year was a grind, trying to lose some pounds and get back into the lineup. But it was a real difficult injury for me, but we were able to battle through it.
Despite that, the next season you do reach the 30-goal mark again. However, it's split between two teams. You're traded from Colorado back home to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and you're real productive with the Leafs when you arrive, 7 goals in just 11 games. But that franchise at the time had a glut of centermen over that stretch that you were there. You had Darryl Sittler, you had Walt McKechnie, Billy DeLago got there.
Right.
So what was I found the trade to be curious, first of all. Was it a surprise to you, and what was your reaction to it?
Well, I was. It happened in the middle of my third year there. We were struggling in Colorado, and my name came up for trades. I kept hearing my name to be traded, and I really thought actually that I was going to Chicago on the deadline. And when I walked into the meeting with the general manager, he told me I had been traded to Chicago. He was on the phone, and he said, I'll be with you in a minute, just to let you know you're going to Chicago. And so then I sat there and waited, and he put down the phone, and then he apologized and said, I'm so sorry, you're going to Toronto. So, but I was thrilled to be traded to the Maple Leafs, even though when I got there, Jim Gregory and Roger Nielsen sat down and talked to me and said you're going to be used in basically only offensive situations. We think we got a real solid team, and we need a little bit of scoring. So, again, I loved playing for the Maple Leafs. Unfortunately, Roger Nielsen and Jim Gregory got let go that summer, and Punch Imlach and Floyd Smith came in and made lots of changes and mixed things around. So the next year wasn't as much fun for myself or for a lot of guys, and I again end up in the minors, and then a year later found myself traded to Pittsburgh.
Right, it was kind of a dark period in Leafs history, that stretch from that year through several years into the 80s. As you noted, you were spared all that and end up eventually two brief stays in the American Hockey League, where, as always, and I think in the end of it, Paul Gardner, you're going to end up, when you look at the stats, one of the most prolific players in the history of the American Hockey League, too. And that was one of the things as a fan. You're looking at it, you're scoring like crazy in the NHL, you're scoring like crazy in the NHL. You say to yourself, somebody just take this guy, give him a regular shift, get him on the power play. And the Penguins did just that. You started there in 80-81, 34-goal season. talk a little bit about going to Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh in the pre-Mario days. You're still trying to sell the game there, but talk a little bit about playing in Pittsburgh and for the Penguins in the early '80s.
Well, again, for me, it was a blessing to get back into the big leagues and to show what I could do. And Eddie Johnson, Baz Bastine had confidence in me, and they put me on the power play and gave me a lot of ice time. And I was, fortunate to play with Ricky Kehoe majority of my time there, a great player. And so they were productive years for myself, and I loved Pittsburgh. 3 of my children were born there, and it's still a very favorite place for me. But again, it was a lot of ice time, and as you said, we were trying to sell the game. We gave the Islanders in St. Louis all they could handle in the playoffs in a couple of years, and then things again after 3 years slipped a little bit, and then they eyed up Mario coming, and so they made some moves so to help get Mario there, but. Eddie Johnson played me a tremendous amount and had lots of confidence in me. And again, I really enjoyed my days there and was able to lead the power play, NHL and power play goals a couple of years. And so it's certainly a popular place for me. But when I talk to people now, they say, what about Pittsburgh? When did you play there? And I always tell them BM before Mario. So,
right.
Yeah, but... then again, it was great. I continued to live there and enjoy my time there. And again, got to play with some great players. Randy Carlyle ran our power play, and I just tried to tip in as many of his shots and Ricky's as I could.
Well, you certainly were effective in front of the net. Obviously, everybody knows you for that. Your ability to convert in front of the goal, and as you said, Randy Carlyle was on his way to a Norris Trophy season. I believe it was 80-81. Rick Kehoe, 55 goals. And as you said, in 2 years, the St. Louis Blues had a great 80-81 season. You guys almost knocked them off in round one. And, of course, you almost derailed that whole Islander dynasty. Again, just one game, one goal away from doing that. One of the players that always intrigued me, now as a fan, I can't tell you that I liked him much. I wasn't a big fan of him, but he had a heck of a career for himself. Paul Baxter. What type of guy was Paul? Obviously tough and a good defenseman, but what type of teammate was he?
Well, he was certainly a good teammate. He was a tough player, and he protected all of us. Anytime there was a skirmish going on, Paul was certainly right there, and a very competitive guy. Quite a quiet guy, sort of off the ice. Real family man, very religious person on the off days and things like that. But when it got time to play, he was very, very competitive, and I think he had better skills than a lot of people thought. I think everybody thought him as a tough guy, but he could score and make some good plays and some good passes when the time was right. So he was a good teammate and had a good career for himself.
Yeah, he sure did. Paul, on a sour note, and I asked this for 2 reasons. Number one, you're in the short end of one of the hockey's most vicious attacks that I ever saw with Jimmy Mann, which incredibly he got a 10-game suspension for while you missed 20+. But that's beside the point. But the point is, it's a blindside shot for which you're not prepared. Obviously, you suffer a broken jaw. And my question I ask is, I most recently talked to Bryan Trottier, who had a similar circumstance with Chris Chelios in 1989, and we talked a little bit about the psychological impact that would have getting your mind back where it should be when you come back to play. So my question is, after suffering such a horrific injury, did it affect you mentally at all when you came back? Were you looking over your shoulder at all, or no?
I don't believe so. There's some people that in the Pittsburgh area that hinted that I didn't go to the net as hard as I did before. But if you look at my stats when I came back from the injury, I was still able to put up some goal scoring numbers, and I just I don't believe it did. Maybe it did, and I didn't recognize it. But it was certainly an ugly incident, and still get reminded about it quite a bit when people talk about my career, and that's okay. That things happen.
Sorry about
that way. No, that's okay. That's it's interesting. I went to Pittsburgh this year for the alumni golf tournament, and the limousine driver that picked me up, that was the first thing that he mentioned. He asked if I ever get the guy back that punched me. So it's it's sort of what I in some ways I became famous for in Pittsburgh, but it was a ugly part of the game, and those things happen.
You spent a lot of time in front of the net and a lot of time against opposing defensemen. I was curious, in that era, that was in the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of great defensemen. In your opinion, who were the toughest defensemen you had to play against on a nightly basis?
Oh, wow. Well, the guy that I hated the most, if you want that, and not personally hated, but was most difficult to play against, was Jerry Hart. Was a defenseman with the Islanders, and he was always the guy killing penalties. He wasn't the biggest guy, but he was strong as could be, and he would position himself in front, and we'd start battling, and he'd grab my stick and hold on to it, and then he'd fall, and then we'd end up both falling down to the ice and wrestling around and try to get back up and everything. So he's certainly the one guy that I remember a lot. He wasn't a dirty player. He was just a real hard guy to play against, and I would have loved to play against him if they had that holding the stick penalty that they do now, that they didn't have back in those days. But now there was some real tough guys in front of the net. You'd have to sort of pick your spot when to slide in and slide out and things like that. But it was a pleasure really to play against all these guys at that level. Anytime I've been able to catch up with any of them on Facebook or see them somewhere, anybody I played against, it's a pleasure to talk to these guys. They're all competitive like myself and all wanted to win, but Jerry Hart's the one that I guess I remember the most because of a lot of games against the Islanders and stuff, and him and I battling in front of the net.
On the other end, Paul, who was the best forward that you played against? You played against a lot of greats, a lot of Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
Who was the one guy that impressed you the most? Obviously, you played against Gretzky, but who was the one guy when you were out there was the toughest for you to handle from a defensive standpoint on the other side?
Well, I mean, it's hard not to say Wayne Gretzky, but he played with a tremendous team. And Edmonton always gave us fits, and Wayne was the class of the league, and by far the best player that I think I played against. The toughest guy, the guy that gave me the hardest time, that I couldn't win a face-off against, and I battled and always became sore and everything after, was Bryan Trottier. Mm-hmm. He was a bull of a man, strong, competitive, a little bit dirty when he had to be, and and played with great players too. So you'd always end up and be about 3-13 on your face-offs and a -2 after you come playing against the Islanders and an ice bag on somewhere. So Bryan was a great player, and I've got to know him through the Penguins alumni, and we enjoy some laughs together. But he certainly was a great player. But I think that Wayne Gretzky was by far the class of the league, and had some great moments off the ice with Wayne in a few charity events and everything. So he certainly ranks way up there with great people. But got to meet Bobby Orr and play against him a little bit, and obviously in Pittsburgh, knowing Mario, they're all were fabulous players.
I was wondering if Bobby Orr came to practice at all with the Penguins with Eddie Johnston leading the way there.
Yeah, not when I was around, but when we were in Chicago, Bobby was with Chicago at the time, and I got to through Eddie and our agent, I got to meet Bobby quite a few times, and I worked at his hockey school one year. Him and Mike Walton had a hockey school,
right? So
Bobby became a friend, and we both at the time had Al Eagleson as an agent. So I ran into him at a few charity events and everything. But he was a great a great person, always willing to help and everything, and just always smiling, always positive, and again, one of the classiest guys that I got to meet in this fabulous game, and would love to see him again and get a chance to talk to him again at some point. But yeah, Bobby, again, he'd see your game and always make a comment to try and help or just give you a positive pat on the back type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Paul, after the 82-83 season, another good season, 28 goals in 78 games, 70 games. After that, the next season, you find yourself in the American League with Baltimore, and that begins basically a 3-year stretch where you are scoring at an unbelievable pace, Gretzky type of numbers in the American Hockey League. First of all, how does it end up, and one of my mysteries of hockey watching career is how does it end up that you're not in the National Hockey League? You never were unproductive. And so my question is, like, what circumstances transpired that you found yourself stuck in the American League for that stretch?
I'm not quite sure. It's sort of a mystery at times to myself. I mean, I went down to Baltimore, and I know there was some circumstances there where it didn't bother Pittsburgh to lose because they were trying, although they would never admit it, to finish last in the NHL to get Mario in the draft. So we had a heck of a Baltimore team down there, and probably should have won the cup, but I think there was too many frustrated players when playoff time came around. The next year I signed in Washington to be part of the power play, and signed a different type of contract so that I would play quite a bit in Washington, but it didn't work out. I led the American League in scoring, and the only good, I guess, is part of it is I enjoyed Binghamton and the people, but I was able to get to the NHL to score my 200 and 201 goals. I had no 199 at the time, and
so
I was thankful for the chance I was able to go up and sneak 2 in and end up with over 200 goals. And then went to Rochester to be a player assistant coach with the Buffalo organization, and I think it just got felt that I was doing such a good job as an assistant coach down there that I got left down there and scored 61 goals and set some records with them. But never really got a chance to come up and play other than a couple of games. And at that point, my back was starting to give me some problems from the earlier injury, and I just didn't feel it was worth playing anymore in the minors. If somebody would have given me an opportunity to, maybe try the big leagues again, I might have continued to play, but it just didn't seem worth it at the time.
That's understandable. Just quickly looking back to 84-85, the Binghamton Whalers teams, I think you guys had about 53 guys go through that year, but you also were there for the beginning of Hartford Whalers, because of dual affiliation, the Hartford Whalers resurgence. So you had Ray Ferraro, Kevin Dineen, Ulf Samuelson, right, Dean Evison, Paul McDermott, and head coach Larry Plow. So for yourself, you're in a circumstance that you don't necessarily want to be in, but at the same time, you're providing leadership to your teammates, and a good friend of mine as well, David A. Jensen, down there as well. I have fond memories of you, and so basically that's a good life lesson here. So again, you're in a circumstance that's less than optimal, but you're making the best of it. And what is your recollection of yourself, your frame of mind, and all those young guys coming through Binghamton? Yeah,
there's some great young guys. We had a real fun room. Myself and Marty Howe were there, and probably were at the start of the year the two leaders because of our age and experience and everything. And as you say, we had some great young guys coming through. Kevin Dineen, so excited for his first professional game. He went out with the suspenders down on his pants on the ice, and I know Ray Ferraro was frustrated because he couldn't get on the power play because I was on the first power play. And Ray was a great goal scorer and a great guy on the power play. And I know at first he was frustrated with all that. But we had a good mix, and when we knew that Hartford brass were in town watching the game, the Washington guys would skate slower and warm up and make mistakes, and vice versa. We had a big trade involving Peter Sidorkowicz, the goalie, in the midseason, so we made players change stalls and everything, even though they were still staying with the same team. But Larry Plow did a good job with us, and was a good leader, and he helped me start to think about coaching, because there was some times when he was sick or he had meetings to go to, and he would leave me in charge of the guys to run practice, and it's sort of where I got a idea that I thought maybe I'd like to get into the coaching ranks.
Right, and as you said, you retired, you had a plan, and that was coaching, and you've coached at various levels, including the National Hockey League, of course, for a long time, and a lot of different circumstances, both at Newmarket and Baltimore, Portland, a long stretch in Nashville. Could you talk a little bit about, I guess I could we keep you here for about 3 hours talking about all this. You coach, but I won't, I promise. But talk a little bit about that first year in Nashville. You're coaching with my old friend Brent Peterson and Barry Trotz, of course. And what was it like? I mean, it had to be exciting. You guys had a pretty good team, 28 wins. And talk a little bit about that experience coaching there, Paul.
Oh, it was fabulous. The year before, the team, Barry and I were hired, and was probably the busiest year of my life, moving my family to Nashville and getting a home there and everything. It was terrific, but Barry and I had to go scout on a nightly basis, and the thing about it, being a pro scout and going around, we didn't have a home game, so there was no place to come home and sit and watch a couple of games and enjoy your family. So it was probably 27, 28 games a month, and all of them on the road, different places. And we would come home on Mondays and meet with David Poyle, and Barry and I would sit down the whole day meeting, going through our lists, and see our families Monday night and be back on the road on Tuesday. So it was a very long season, but it was so enjoyable. The people were so excited about hockey coming, and Craig Leopold, the terrific owner, went out of his way to make everything great for us and stuff like that. And so we just went along with trying to get the team organized and everything, and then we got excited for the season to start, and the people were going crazy, and they didn't fully understand the game. A couple of times in the first few games, we'd slap the puck from center, and it would miss the goalie and hit the glass, and they were cheering like crazy. So it took them a while to sort of catch on and get excited about it, but it was just super for me. I loved the city of Nashville. I got to meet some tremendous people. My wife was in the business of catering type of thing, and worked for Marriott. And so anytime there was an event going on, quite a few of the times she was involved in it. So we got to meet a tremendous amount of country music stars, and I loved country music. And,
great.
So it made it great for us. We had anytime there was an event or they knew someone special was coming to the game, they would call my wife Sherry to meet with them in the box and entertain them. And on Mr. Leopold's money, we took out quite a few country stars for dinner. So it was a real special year, the first year. But we were a competitive team too. We did our best at drafting guys that were hungry and that really played hard for 60 minutes, and that's all that Barry pushed at them, that you play hard for 60 minutes, we'll make some good things happen. And Barry was a great tactician, and Brent and I did our best at keeping guys revved up and ready to play. And so I think it all was a good start, and obviously proud of where the franchise is now. But the people made it fun. It's a fun city, and it was some great memories there.
Paul, looking back at your career, first of all, I just want to ask you one question about your family, and that is, didn't necessarily bounce around coaching. In other words, you had long stretches everywhere you went, long in coaching years. 4 years in Newmarket, other 4 or 5 in Portland, another 5 in Nashville. What type of impact does that have on your family? You're put down roots, solid roots, and then you have to move. And these aren't necessarily geographically close areas. You're going all over the place. I guess it's a great experience, new people. But what type of adjustment is that for the whole Gardner clan when you have to make those moves?
Well, I had a tremendous wife in my wife Sherry, who I mentioned, and she was willing to do anything or go anywhere that we felt was good for myself. And the kids, my twins, who are 17 now, are still great travelers. But they settled wherever it was good for Dad to go. And later in my career, lately I've been over in Europe and have to leave them at home and everything. But without them, I wouldn't have been able to do it, and without their support. I've always said to them, if you don't want me to go or you don't want to do this, we won't. We do it as a family, and I'm very, very lucky and blessed to have a family that supported me, and especially my wife, Sherry. She was always there for me, quietly behind the scenes, helping me and writing half of my emails because she was better at it than me, than my grammar. But it was it's been a blessed life for us in lots of ways, and hopefully maybe a couple more years at this coaching gig, and then we can really settle down. But again, the children have been great, and I think they've enjoyed coming over to Europe when I've coached over there to spend some time. And again, I'm a lucky guy.
Absolutely. You sound that way. And wives, of course, are the most underrated people in hockey. No doubt about it. So you ended up with good fortune there as well. Paul, my last question for you is, you look back, the lessons you have met everybody who's anybody in hockey. You've been all kinds of places, up and down, good and bad. You take away from it a lot of life lessons, to be sure. But what type of, in the end, what type of lessons in perseverance and overcoming obstacles would you share with others related to your own career and your own life and what you've learned?
Well, yeah, that's a tough one, because I've been, as you said, I've been blessed to meet a lot of good people and learn a lot from some of my experiences. Early in my career, I scored my 100th goal in Detroit and my 101 back in Toronto, and then get sent to the minors the next day. And you sit and wonder,
wow.
What have you got to do to stay in the big leagues? So I think if a person would like to sit down just to show how you got to just keep working at it and keep working at it. Is the biggest thing, and that's what I try and put to my son, who's now going to head off to college to play college baseball and on a scholarship, and I just try and push at him to keep working it if you enjoy it. Biggest thing is to stay positive. I had a high school teacher once tell me, after I didn't win an award that I thought I should get at high school. There was the big award, and I didn't receive it. And he came up to me and shook my hand and said, "You had a great season." And he said, "Life is full of ups and downs to test us." And I never forgot that. So it's very true. There's a lot of great ups and there's a lot of difficult downs, and you just try and keep on an even keel. And if you're around me, you got to smile, because I love to smile. I love to laugh, and I love to tell jokes. And if you talk to a lot of my players that played for me, I love pranks. And but that makes everything lots of fun.
Absolutely. Well, this was a lot of fun, Paul. I greatly appreciate the time. I've wanted to talk to you for quite some time, and I was always fascinated by your career for some of the reasons you talked about. Some things that you've solved a few mysteries here for me tonight where, like I said, you were, in the end, when you look at it on a per-game basis, there weren't a lot of players in the history of the game that scored more than yourself. And I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk with you, and we'll keep close tabs on you going forward, and we hope to talk to you again soon.
Well, thank you very much. I'd love to talk again anytime, and thanks for recognizing the stats. I know my family's proud of it, and we're all proud of it, and hopefully, again, a couple more years of coaching, and we can sit back and work on my golf game.
Absolutely. Sounds good, Paul. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you very much.
All
okay,
right,
let's do it again.
You bet.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast. Be sure to visit us at prohockeyalumni.org.